Hello, my name is Jamie Booth. Welcome to my dining room table. This started as a relatively simple retro computing project. I had a 486 laptop from the mid-90s, 1993 I believe, and it had been given to me in 1999 as the company I worked for was lifecycle replacing it. So I used it for another couple of years before eventually replacing it with a more modern laptop. And it's been sitting in my storage room ever since. So one day I thought, well, it'd be a cool retro computing project to pull this thing out of the storage room, load Windows 95 on it, and see what I can get to work. I was reasonably certain that the hard drive had died. I think that's why it stopped being used in the first place. And after 30 years, it was a reasonable conclusion. I also expected quite thoroughly the batteries to be toast. This was probably going to be a machine that only worked when plugged into the wall. Cool, no problem. So I took it down, started opening it up, pulled the hard drive out. I had ordered a replacement 44-pin ID drive, an SSD that I was going to put into it. Great. In the process of opening it up to put the hard drive in, I discovered exactly how brittle these plastics have become after 30 years. And I broke several places on the keyboard tray as I was trying to unscrew stuff and get to the hard drive. Then I did finally get the hard drive installed. I put the keyboard tray back, put all the screws in, went to boot it from a 95 install floppy, and it wouldn't read the floppy. Just kept telling me non-system disk. And this is the first of many, many things that will go wrong with this project, but I discovered that the floppy drives that are used for this are this EME 278 floppy drive. And they have a single belt in them, which drives the floppy. After 30 years, almost 100% of them have disintegrated to the point that you can't use them anymore. They're either too loose, which is what happened on several of them I had, or they're broken, or they turn to goo, which is the worst possible scenario because then you've got to clean it off with alcohol or something. So the floppy drive wouldn't read the floppies. I had the new hard drive installed and I was able to at least see the new hard drive in the BIOS, but I couldn't do anything with it. So I was talking to the members of my retro computing club, and one of the guys there had cleaned out the storage center of an old Toshiba repair center and said, oh, I have a whole bunch of parts for that laptop. Let me bring them to you. He brought me 2 boxes full of parts for a Toshiba Satellite T2130, which is this original machine I started working on, and said, just take them. So having these 2 boxes of parts, I was like, great, I'm going to have all new plastics for this thing. And I looked, and indeed there were several replacement plastic pieces, so cool. I started tearing this thing apart, trying to get everything out of it that I could. In the interim, I had bought a donor laptop. This was a T2135 with a passive matrix screen, which didn't work. So my first thought was, well, I'll just use the plastics from this one. So I'll take the bottom plastic, which is in really good shape, the top plastic, and cool, I'll just swap components over and use this. What I discovered pretty quickly was the plastics for the display, where I was thinking I could just remove the passive matrix and install the active matrix from the original machine, are not compatible. So it actually has a different piece of plastic for the back where the panel screws in. And I realized this after I had removed the back panel and the front panel from my display, and in the process broken them in several places. So I was at this kind of awkward place where I needed a piece I had already broken. And that was bad. So my wife and I took some super glue and we started super gluing all sorts of bits together, trying to get a functioning piece of plastic that we could use for this. I think at this point in time, I have fixed the floppies. I got someone to print a new belt for me out of TPU. I installed them on the floppy drive, so I believe it's good to go. I'm able to boot from it, read from it. the hard drive spins up. One of the pieces that the gentleman gave me was a replacement 512 meg hard drive, rotational disk, and it spins up, so I believe it's working correctly. The challenge I have now is I would like to use the better active matrix display on the old 2135 chassis. And what I have discovered is the motherboard for the 2135 has a different set of video connectors. Obviously, the passive matrix display took different video inputs. So I went through the box of stuff that he gave me, and one of the things he gave me, after much trial and error, was the replacement motherboard for the original machine I had. This has the correct video connectors for the panel that I have. So what I need to do now is to disconnect everything from this 2135 and remove the motherboard, install the new motherboard, and then remount everything. And that should give me enough to work with that I can attach the hopefully successfully superglued plastic with the active matrix display to this chassis, which is otherwise relatively intact. And I've got to do it without breaking anything important. Obviously, this plastic is extremely brittle. You look at it funny and it breaks. So this is going to be a challenge under the best of circumstances, especially given the nature of some of the smaller plastic parts that go inside this thing. They're not particularly sturdy. So I'll be attempting this. I'm not going to make you listen to me the whole time. I'm going to put this on a time lapse and you can watch it go. Hopefully at the end of this, I will have cleared off most of this table and there will be one functioning laptop. And the rest of the stuff can go in a box for anyone else that needs replacement parts. Alright, so if you were watching the last bit of the time lapse there, I made a pretty large mistake in trying to remove this piece because there's a cable stuck in the wrong place. I snapped off a huge piece of the back of this. So I am going to have to go to an alternate piece because I think that's too big for me to easily super glue. There were a few other little cracks that I might have tried it, but that's pretty far off. I have this piece, which was originally with the 2135. It's in good shape. It's got one small crack here that I think I will attempt to super glue. So I'm going to pause this for today, and I will bring back the time lapse tomorrow, hopefully when that glue is dried, and I will attempt to get this apart so that I can do that. Hi, welcome back to day 2. So yesterday, if you remember, at the end of the day, I broke the top plastic that I was working with, ripped a large piece off of it. And I have decided, instead of trying to super glue that, because that's a fairly major break, that I was going to super glue the original plastic that came with this. Only at a minor crack. I just need to keep it from getting worse. So I did that last night. And now that we are ready to continue, I have that all set up. Before I put this on though, and while the system is open and you can see it all, I figured it might be a good time to give you guys a tour of how this thing is laid out before I start trying to put pieces back on top of it and you can't see it anymore. All right, so starting at the back, we have the LCD panel itself. We have the circuit board that drives the LCD panel. And these connect via this ribbon cable to the motherboard here and here. Next we have the power supply. Power supply sits inside the bump at the top of the keyboard, the top plastic. And underneath it, right here, is the power connector. It slides through the back. This power supply is supported by this plastic bracket here, which in addition to holding the power supply up, also serves as a method to pass through the LEDs on the board for things like hard disk access, power, that type of thing. We have a mouse port. So PS2 mouse. We have serial, VGA, and then a universal docking connector port. And then finally on the left over here we have a parallel port. All right, moving forward just a little bit. This is the floppy drive. Connects with this ribbon cable to that connector on the board. Over here, in addition to the 2 video connectors, we have this ribbon cable port right here, which is for the keyboard and track point. Down below that, we have the PCMCIA slots, so Class 1, Class 2 PCMCIA cards. Not card bus, not the 32-bit versions, just the 16-bit versions. Then we have the connector here. This goes to the buttons for the mouse. So on the keyboard itself, just below where the palm rest is, there are 2 buttons, left and right click. This is the connector for that. In front of that, we have the hard drive. This one actually seems to spin up. It's a 500 meg drive. In addition to the IDE 44-pin connector right here, it's also secured to the motherboard through the case with 4 screws. Over here, we have the battery bay. So the battery connects here. This piece of the motherboard on the flip side also has a socket for a memory chip. So this system comes with 8 meg on board, and then you can add an extra memory chip. Over here we have the resume battery. So this system actually has a separate battery for keeping the RAM alive when you put it to sleep. So instead of using the main battery, or I guess after the main battery is exhausted, this little Varta battery, which I've removed because I don't want it to leak all over the place, will actually keep the memory alive for another couple days. And then there's a much smaller battery which goes here for the BIOS. It's also rechargeable, so I've taken it out of the system. Okay, so that's the tour. I will now attempt to pick up where I left off yesterday and do this in a time-lapse fashion where I try to reinstall this and hopefully get the display mounted. I think one of the problems I had yesterday is this cable has a whole bunch of these ferrite cores on the end of it, and I think I wasn't sliding them far enough through the slot. It was causing the plastic to bulge where it probably shouldn't have. So I'm going to see if I can't prop this up a little bit today so that it's closer to where it should be when it's actually installed, and hopefully that'll give me more slack in this cable so I can run this through more like what it was supposed to be. All right, here we go. I was going to pick up where I left off yesterday with the newly superglued plastic. However, when I picked it up to bring it to this side of the table, it cracked again. So I'm going to do one more round of super glue on it and see if I can get it to stick. If not, I'll just put it on as it is. Okay. Once that has had a couple hours to set, I will try it again and come back with you. Hopefully we get day 2.5. If not, we'll get day 3, depending on how that looks after a couple hours. Hello, welcome back to day 3. I have my piece. I believe the super glue is set, so we're going to try and pick this up where we left off with me reassembling the top plastic, mounting the display, and trying to see if the super glued faceplate for the display that covers all this stuff up is also working. Just looking at the number of places where I broke plastic on both the back plate and the front plate, there may be some tape involved. So we'll see how that goes. Give me just a minute and we'll get started. Alright, so we have hit another snag. The plastic in the frame of the display, where it mounts to the right hinge, 2 of the screw mount posts have broken off. So I'm going to try and super glue them one more time and see if I can get them to stay. And then I think we're pretty close. This is not quite clicked down, but I don't want to do that until I got the display at least routed correctly. But everything's connected, and I think I could probably finish this if I were able to screw it in correctly. So let me glue this and we'll come back to it and see if we can get that to work. Okay, the glue on this seems to have set, so I'm going to try again to mount this to the top plastic, at which point I will try to snap the top plastic down onto the bottom, and hopefully we'll be through most of the danger zone, because after that it's just attaching the keyboard and the palm rest. I'm not going to put the battery in because I need to do some work on that, but otherwise we should be able to at least get everything installed. Still curious about the top plate? We'll find out about that. So, a few small problems. The screen plastics are really badly broken. I probably need to see if I can either source another one or maybe 3D print one in multiple parts, but I can't get the screws in to hold the front plate on. It actually broke while I was putting it back together, so I think it may have seen its best days. I'm going to fire the sucker up, and if it works, I'm going to start cleaning all the rest of the stuff up. Thanks for hanging out with me. There's a lot of work getting this thing back together again. I sure hope it works. Alright, so as you can see, it is actually booted up from the floppy disk, and the screen works. I think the keyboard works. Yeah, the keyboard works too. Alright, so I'm going to see if I can get an OS installed on this thing. Maybe Windows 95, see what happens. But I think I'm good to clean up what's on the table. That big mess can go away. I've got a working computer.